Good evening and very welcome to H635, and I will take up as a subject tonight at the lecture language as a hologram. And this is a model that's been proposed by three people as far as I know. One is Luria, who was in cohesion with Pribram, and Pribram, I think he met Vygotsky in Moscow. And hologram, of course, is taken from the other picture of how reality could be. And I try to make a drawing here. This is the world and this is language, and this is more or less Tractatus' idea of how language and reality works in Tractatus, and it's also the ideology of the analytical philosophers. And what do we have here? What sort of traits can you find? Well, in this focal setting, as I would like to call it, because it's not an ideology, it's not an outspoken hypothesis underlying the whole thing. It's rather a focal setting. But here you use proof for truth. You have something that's important, independent observators or observers. Truth is something transcendent. It's not present. It doesn't belong to the here and now, so to speak, but it's somewhere else. Whereas the hologram is very different. It's indeed very different, and I think this could be the one that's hard to understand. In a hologram, every little piece corresponds to the whole. So even if you take out a little tidbit or even a fraction of it, it will have the whole in itself. And that's very weird. Almost you need to see to believe it, but that's how it is. In this one, there is no outside, inside. When you do a hologram, even the photographer, or whatever you should call him, is included in the whole thing. And it's extremely important how you do it. It's almost down to fingertip precision. So the subject is very important, and the subject is a big part when you look into the hologram, even if it's a part or if the whole thing, depending how you look or what you see, because it's a bit ambigram to the whole thing as well. It does not make these very strict borders between past, now and future, because they all glide into each other. Whereas here we live in the now and the past is something gone. Not important to that. It's history, just history. It doesn't affect the now in that way, other than a story, which is a story about the story, something like that. Heidegger called that Historia. Here, history is much more important. History, it's where everything happened that made language work. That's when it was born, that's when it was used in a special way, and then you find the meaning of language partly in the past, but also how you use it today. And you can say the meaning is something inside the whole hologram, whereas here it's very distinct. One word corresponds to one thing. And I would always almost like to say that this idea of language and world it does have what can you say? It gets a bit absurd sometimes. Derrida pointed that out. How can one word correspond to one thing, and you can take out all the rest? How do you know what is correspond? what is reference if you only have one word and one thing in the world? Doesn't really make sense. There is some underpinning of independence that is really, really weird. And I think Saussure had one solution that was like half-cooked, which Derrida took apart. And I think he's hinting to, I'm not sure, but I think Derrida is hinting to that everything is connected somehow with difference, and everything differs to everything else. So I think Derrida is indirectly proposing a hologrammatic view of the world. I'm not perfectly sure about that. Actually, and I think about it, my hologram doesn't look really like Spain, does it? It looks more like France. It looks more like Spain and Portugal. But you have like superficial similarities, and the superficiality of the word, the language order is very obvious. It's very hard to see how it would hold. And of course, it's not at all a scientific theory. It doesn't hold scientific proof, whereas the hologram is the proven solution to quantum physics. So that's the difference, but that's not the thing we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk to how does this change language, how we look at language, how we use language, and how we find it to be a good thing for us, for our surroundings. Because I'd say it does make a difference whether this unspoken assumption holds or this spoken assumption holds. And I try to put it in a perspective, and you be duly warned here first. I'm going to use exaggerations. This is going to be more like a fable. But this fable is going to show you the difference between world and language order and a hologrammatic order. And number 3 is going to be the purely hologrammatic order, and I'm going to have a number 2 in between to make some sort of segue. And I'm going to use different universities in the world as an example for this fable. And for the first one, and I think this is not uncalled for, I would call Gothenburg University analytical philosophical university. It's hard to argue that situation, because we never ever historically had anything but analytical philosophy in Gothenburg. Almost. It's a short period where we had idealistic German philosophy. And because of the situation, the historical situation in Sweden, where analytical philosophy almost became state religion, with what's his name? Wennerström, or what's his name? Wenström, who is the only internationally known philosopher, but nobody read him. But he had a huge influence in Swedish politics and educational system. And here we have this idea of language in itself being representative. So the idea goes a little bit like this. You just have to say the word, and then you have the meaning for free. If you pretty much pronounce it the right way so people understand you, you get the meaning for free. It's almost like a haven, and all the meaning you can pick down. You don't need to put any effort into it, and just say the word and you're done. And almost all the exams in Gothenburg University are judged that way. I had some instances when I read English, when I studied English, where people, even though the person answered correctly, some teacher thought it was not well enough anyway. But those are absolute exceptions. And there is also an exclusion of all negative space. Gothenburg University, in this fable, nothing is important when it comes to tradition. It doesn't have a major post to speak. The houses are completely new, more or less. They're not very delightful. There's nothing historical or important with them, because they're just negative space around the students and the professors and the study and the classes. It doesn't matter. It's not part of reality. Do you hear? This is crazy, really. What are you left with? Just the words, more or less. And you just have to pronounce them, and then you are knowledgeable. And you can pass the exam by imitating the word. You do not have to have all this cumbersome hologram thing, like having the meaning of the word somewhere embedded or something like that. You just have to have the word. And what happens if you look from this perspective, from the hologram perspective, is that you are crushing the whole hologram, and you just use a little fraction of a fraction. And what you get is the almost ghost-like picture of the world/language. It's very, very dimly lit. A faint projection, I call it. It has the flavor of the whole thing, almost like a pre-made lunch that you buy in the freezing disk and put into the microwave. And everything which is really, really important in other university, like clothing, etiquette, movement also. And why not things that I discovered when I studied English? Tonality, prosody, stress, pitch, accent, intonation, everything that has been, like, what should you say, transferred in the ages. All that is gone. Instead, we left with a sterilized, pluralized, and generalized knowledge. Just pronounce the words, and you know everything. There's nothing more to it. And the equivalence with the doctor would be that the doctor knows all the vocabulary to be a doctor, and that's enough. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to play the part. He just will be given a stamp of approval. Out you go, you're a doctor, you know the words, you know what a diagnosis means, you know what a bacterium is. Well, at least word-wise. And the general environment is vastly different from the next example in my fable, and that's Oxford. I spent some time in Oxford in the late 90s, not studying, just living there. And what you get there is something that is incredibly old. Is not changed either. They preserved it the way it was built. There has been a transferment from person to person. Tone, pitch, body language, body tone, everything's been transferred from generation to generation, from person to person, all the way back until the day it was founded. And I don't know how old Oxford is, but I think it was founded somewhere in the 12th century or something like that. And that's staggering 800-900 years. And this is the hologrammatic structure. The more you have of history, because look here, in the hologram there is no difference between past, now and future. You can't say this is the only thing that exists in this second. Part of existence is also the past and the future. Whereas in the first example, exaggerated example of course, nota bene, but then it's only the now. You don't have to have the history behind it. It's very close to how we look at space. You don't have to have the surroundings of knowledge, because you just have to have the precious insight somewhere. So you make a shortcut or a silhouette cut around the person and say the knowledge contains within that entity. Outside doesn't matter. It can be any environment. It can be in the jungle, it can be out in mid-air, it can be out in space, it doesn't matter, because the knowledge is contained somewhere inside that person. And you can hear, this is the atomistic theory as well from Newton, because the Newton say the particle is the only thing that's important, nothing else, nothing else, and all its relationship in the world. So there are similarities here. Another thing that's very important in Oxford is timing. There is a specific pace to everything that's done. I didn't notice that in the beginning, but the first lectures began very slowly, and that speed has been developed during the century. It's really weird, takes some getting used to, and you get a feeling of something very, very antiquated. That's very, very old. Some things you don't find here from the hologram, that is how you write. You write in the modern way in Oxford today. You use computers, you don't use hand, and before they use writing machines or some other tool. How you transfer something has never been important in Oxford. It was a different style of writing before that took some eloquence to it, and whose skill also was transferred, but that suddenly disappeared somewhere on the line. If you want to have your diploma, that's still going to be very, very eloquently made. And now to my last example, it's going to be the university in Seoul. And in Seoul you study not only the subject, you also study language in a way. You study the history of language, because this is very hologram. The past is very, very important. And the words, they have a history that goes 2,500 years back. And they have an involvement, they have a development, and they have their quaints, and they're all different. They don't have a rule in common, which makes them very historically, because you understand history is so weird because it's always different. It's always surprising. It has weird things, and therefore that writing system doesn't really make any sense in a Western way. But it has everything of the past, and it's a specific past. It's the past of that area. And it's also the past of those people still living there today, so many 100 years later. Here, in the other end, at example 3, everything is etiquette, everything is manner, everything is done in a specific order that's been handed down for at least 2,000 years. Is the Confucian manner, and that pervades every trait of the knowledge here. It's old, and you have to know it not only by word. You have to know it by the complete part of every part of your body, all the way down to the bowing. And that should be made in a specific order, pronouncing specific words in a specific way. So tonality, pitch, all those things that's stemming from the body. This is a little bit like I was discussing with Ian McGilchrist, vowels. How vowels come into the picture was something unnecessary. But the things that are important are pitch, accent, stress, and those things, because they convey things that really mean something. And wouldn't you agree, they are a bit more bodily somehow? Because stress is something you do with your whole body. And it's very hard to imagine somebody who's completely solemn having good stress. You get this computer voice from that person, or artificial voice, but by stressing, and you use the way of pitch, like rising the tone of the voice or lowering it. You get all these bodily effects, and those effects are transferred history-wise. Another thing is like distance is not really there. You not only read knowledge, but you are that knowledge. You put it to heart. It's inside of you. And here's one thing that Kalle would like, and I know that. Root learning is an alpha and omega in Korea. You really need to do your root learning. And that goes at every level. That's the foundation. It has always been. Used to be in Oxford as well, but today I don't know how it is about that. But in Korea, root learning is extremely important. There's no doubt about that. And the root learning is a little bit like making the hologram stronger for each way. Both Luria and Vygotsky look into what happens with the brain when you train your cognitive capacity, because that's what root learning is. You train your cognitive capacity. And what we learn now is the more you train and the more exactly you imitate, the more balanced you become in your body. Isn't that odd? That's a really odd offspring. But that has to do with the hologram, the scientifically proven model for the world, does not have inside-outside. Actually, it doesn't make any sense to speak about inside-outside. Take the wave, for instance. The wave in the universe is pervading every little space in the world. How can you speak about inside-outside? How can you say, like in example 1, that the costume, that the tradition has nothing to do with knowledge? And how can you say that the knowledge is somewhere inside? And if you're using that logic, where inside is the logic? How far do you have to go into the head or the heart to really hit the essence of knowledge? And that's a knowledge that is so concentrated, it doesn't even have a form. Then you're beyond the words. And I kid you not, I met some people from Gothenburg University, among them my former professor Torbjörn Tännsjö. And he said that true meaning doesn't take word. It doesn't have a word. It's just meaning, he says. And he said one day we will be able to communicating, he said, with pure meanings. So he was a private language professor. He said it actually disgusted him that the words had a pronunciation. That was something crooked, something ghastly, because it wasn't pure for him. The only purity was in absolute meaning. And then a student who was a newcomer asked, but what did he say? Ursäkta mig, Majen. He said Majen. That's not a fit word to address a professor in Sweden. Majen, men vad är den här meningen någonstans? And this young guy, he just pointed out of the window. Finns det på receptionen, frågade han. He was honest. And I remember poor Torbjörn Tännsjö, who was like crushed for a second. Don't ask such nonsense. But I think it's actually, even though this student wasn't the brightest one, he probably was the brightest one, but he was completely green. I think he does have a point. What does transcendent meaning mean? That should give meanings to the words, but it's not part of this world, not part of the hologram. Coming from somewhere else, I don't know where. There are some definite oddities with this language theory, and it doesn't hold when you start looking at it carefully. So it's not only this is the proven model, this has a lot of nonsense built into it, and it's not that hard to find it out. But it has consequences, and that was my main point here with the lecture tonight. It has definite consequences. And I do apologize for the exaggerations. It's a fable, and the fable's use is to show the difference between this model contra this model. That's it is. I don't say that Seoul University is like this exactly. What I want to show, the difference between the hologram and this non-outspoken assumption without actually a proper it has never been explained what it is. It's a little bit like time in Newton, something like that. So I think that's about it. And if you want to, you can check further to Luria, Pribram, and Vygotsky. They're all very interesting, and they speak a lot about the hologram, because the hologram is a fantastic model for things. It can be used in every context, and I bet you we're going to find another context already tomorrow. I say thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.